Many films from the 80s and 90s have seen some exciting sequels and reboots in recent years. Shudder recently released the sequel Nightwatch, Demons Are Forever, to the 1994 classic that makes for one of the best murder mystery films. The 90s were filled with some of the most notable films ever made, and Nightwatch is a Danish entry that has gained quite the fan following in recent years. The film was so popular that Hollywood remade the movie with a big star cast. Let's see what all this hype was about and explore Nightwatch, its remake, and the sequel. Does it stand the test of time after all? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Nightwatch 1994. You thought you knew Jaime Lannister when you saw him in Game of Thrones. Well, there's more to where the actor comes from. Nightwatch 1994 was Nikolai's feature debut, and it is probably one of the best films he has participated in. The film also features Kim Bodnia, an actor who appeared in some of the best films in the Danish film industry. Nightwatch is about a man who joins his new work as a night watchman. No, this one differs from the story in which the museum exhibits come to life at night, and the night watchman handles the situation. In the case of this story, our protagonist joins Martin and joins the Night Watch for a forensic medicine institute, and that's just where the entire film begins. On his first day, the previous watchman shows him around, and while taking him to the place where the fresh bodies are kept, he mentions, in case one of them wakes up, he can pull it, referencing a chain, and the alarm goes off. Then you call the duty doctor. Just call. Having scared Martin enough, he ends with, "Don't worry, it never happens." Yeah, sure, but thanks for mentioning that. It sounds as if working night duties at a morgue doesn't sound creepy enough. Then the old watchman mentions an incident in the morgue when the night watchman was caught in the act of necrophilia. Do not forget this detail. As Martin, our protagonist, embarks on his first day at the Institute, we witness a profound character transformation. His initial unease and fear gradually evolve into an unwavering determination to carry out his duties. A particularly poignant moment is when he must inspect the room with the fresh bodies, initially shielding his face to avoid looking at them. This scene underscores his relatability, showing he's just as scared of this job as any of us would be. Martin is a law student, and his girlfriend is a theater actor. Everything is normal in his life, but then we meet his friend Jens, played by Kim Bodnia, and there is a clear chance that Martin wouldn't have gotten into all this mess if Jens hadn't put him into the trouble. Now, the two have this thing between them where they make challenges for each other, and even though Martin tries to back out at times, Jens' inability to say no only makes it more difficult. The two make a challenge where Martin would have to go on a date with a prostitute, and, well, this is where the trouble begins. Even though the problem started way back when Martin took the night watchman job, meeting Joyce, the prostitute, sets things into motion. During the interaction with the prostitute, she talks about a client of hers who likes to cover her up while she pretends to be dead. She also mentions that this one client killed her friend, and then the client chopped off her scalp. Things at Martin's workplace also see some exciting developments as a victim of the ongoing spree of killings is brought to the morgue. Inspector Wormier, who is investigating the case, strikes up a conversation with Martin, and he mentions that the serial killer likes to cut his victim's scalp off. Watching the victim's body has an impact on Martin, as for the next few days, it continues to haunt him. But one fine day, the alarm, which was not supposed to go off, goes off, and Martin calls up the doctor, but he is told to go and investigate by himself. Martin goes to examine it, only to find a new body lying on one of the beds with the chain for the alarm over it moving. Suddenly, the body sits up, and it turns out that Jens is doing a prank on him. Yes, Jens is probably a friend none of us would want to have, but then there is a chance he might redeem himself by the end. On another night, during his routine work, he goes to the morgue but discovers that the body of the murder victim is not on the bed and there are bloody footsteps all around her bed. He follows the blood trail only to find her sitting at the end of the hall. Martin asks for the attendant, and when he arrives, Martin finds that nothing has happened. The body is lying on the bed, and all the blood marks have disappeared. Inspector Wermier arrives and calms Martin down. On the other hand, Martin's girlfriend Kalinka gets a call from Joyce, and she thinks that it must be related to Jens, so she mentions it to Martin. But soon, Joyce ends up meeting Kalinka, and she tells him details regarding what Martin likes to do to her, like the one she mentioned to Martin during their meeting. Kalinka confronts Martin only to find he disagrees, but her skepticism remains. Now we enter the day when everything goes wrong. Martin goes to his job only to find everyone staring at him suspiciously. Later, Wermier comes in and takes him to the morgue to show that the murder victim's body had been compelled into the prone position. Martin is informed that he's the only person present, so he becomes one of the prime suspects, but Martin tries to prove his innocence. Then he tells Wermier about Joyce and Jens, which puts the suspicion on Jens. Kalinka goes to meet Joyce at her apartment, but when she walks in, she discovers that Joyce is lying naked, face down on the bed with blood all around her. She also hears someone else in the room and realizes the murderer is present there, so she slowly sneaks out. This moment is when we get to see the murderer for the first time, and guess who's been doing these necrophiliac murders all this time? Not Jens, it was Wermier. Wermier goes to the body and puts Martin's semen, which he had taken from Martin to conduct a test, all over her and writes an M next to her with her blood. All the fingers point to Martin, and everyone gathers in his apartment, trying to comprehend the details of everything that has happened so far. Martin tries to solve the case by himself at work and investigates the necrophiliac that the old night watchman had talked about. On going through some old files, he comes across the past night watchman only to find the name of an individual who used to work there. It was Wermier. It's wild that he never really cared to change his name. Wermier arrives at the Institute to talk to Martin and confronts him. When Martin tells him he knows what Wermier did, the inspector threatens that he will kill Kalinka. Right then, Kalinka arrives at the Institute, but the inspector manages to fool her by acting like Martin is attacking him. Kalinka and Wermier run into another room. Martin follows them, but inside the room, Kalinka manages to connect the dots and figure out that Wermier is the killer when the inspector does the whistle that she had heard back in the apartment. He ties her up, and just when he's about to kill her, Martin enters the room, but cannot do anything because Wermier has the upper hand. Meanwhile, another detective reaches the Institute with Jens, and Wermier meets them and tells them that Martin has run away with Kalinka. But Kalinka, who was tied up inside the Institute next to an unconscious Martin, manages to ring the emergency bell in the room. Both the inspector and Jens run inside, but before they can figure things out, Wermier uses the bat to kill the inspector and injure Jens, who is then handcuffed to a pipe. Wermier returns to the room and proceeds to kill Kalinka, but before he can do anything, Jens shoots him down. Jens had managed to free himself by chopping off his thumb. Finally, the case is closed, and we see that the two friends get married to their girlfriends together. Director Ole Bornedal would find a lot of success with this film, and it would launch Nikolai's career too. It would also get into Critics Week at the Cannes Film Festival and find some fan following. With all this success, it wasn't long before Hollywood tried to capitalize.
Disgusting. Don't you think? Don't you think it's just disgusting?
Nightwatch, 1997. Following the film's success, Dimension Films approached the director and asked him to come to the U.S. to make a remake. Steven Soderbergh, the director of the Ocean's trilogy, was hired to rewrite the script, and he managed to make some exciting changes to adapt the story to an American audience. Some of these changes include the restaurant scene where originally Joyce was made to give a blowjob to Martin, but in the new American version, she gives him a handjob instead. Another significant detail that was changed was regarding the trademark of the killer as he used to chop his victim's scalp off. Still, in the American version, he collects their eyeballs. Our very own Obi-Wan, Ewan McGregor, was cast as the protagonist, Martin, fresh off the success of Trainspotting. Other people cast in significant roles include Josh Brolin, Nick Nolte, and Patricia Arquette, each taking on roles of the American version of Jens, Wermier, and Kalinka. While the movie tries to carry the same tone and provides us with some of the best performances from each actor, it fails to leave the same mark the original 1994 film did. The story was sometimes forced to take specific routes to fit the American audience. The excessive changes and lack of creative control for Old Bordendahl also affected it considerably. People would compare it to the 1994 original film, even though this movie had its potential with the performances. However, the studio made heavy changes, and the fact that David Fincher's Seven was released simultaneously didn't help. But the story of the original 1994 Nightwatch doesn't end here. We did get a sequel with Old Bordendahl returning, along with some of the other major stars. Nightwatch: Demons Are Forever 2023. In 2023, we saw The Nightwatch: Demons Are Forever, a direct sequel to the 1994 Nightwatch. A lot has changed since we last saw the characters. Martin's daughter, Emma, played by Fanny Leander Bordendahl, carries the story this time. According to this story, Martin and Kalinka didn't have a happy ending after all, as the trauma remained from that night and Kalinka committed suicide. Jens, on the other hand, left his wife and went to Thailand to run away from his trauma. Now, Emma ends up taking the same job as Martin in the same forensic research institute, and to be honest, a lot has stayed the same since we saw Martin working here. Emma has a reason to do this, as none of the people aware of the events of that night talk about what happened, and it only makes her think more about what caused the trouble that affected her family. However, Emma also tends to take on some of the reckless behavior from Martin and Jens in the first film, even though it doesn't go that far. There are times we witness the behavior that she has with her father, and that makes us wonder if she honestly does care for the trauma that her parent went through, or if she's just curious about the entire ordeal. If you wonder if only these few characters will return, you need to be corrected. Wermier didn't die, but went into a coma. Emma visited him, and that interaction brought him back to life, even though he was blind. His coming back from the coma triggers a series of events as Wermier finds a legacy with a young, mentally disturbed kid who decides to repeat Wermier's actions. The film makes an excellent attempt at bringing us nostalgia for the first time we were in this environment, as we witnessed everything Martin saw in Emma's eyes. One detail was the flies in the light cover inside Martin's office. In the 1994 film, these flies would move around, disturbing Martin and often making him wonder if someone was sneaking around. But Emma does not stand it and removes the flies from the night cover and puts it back on. Around the end of the film, Martin is put inside Wermier's cell at the Institute, and Wermier goes to make his attempt at killing him. But Martin manages to finally kill Wermier by stabbing him with his knife. We can only hope Wermier is dead this time, even though he wasn't majorly involved in the killings that were conducted this time around. Finally, Emma and Martin escape all the trouble and end the ordeal that started 20 years ago. Bordendahl scripted and directed the sequel, and he had some exciting intentions with this because it didn't ruin whatever happened with the 1994 film, unlike the 1997 remake, but the story doesn't have a solid reason to exist. Even though we get to see the trauma and the internal demons of the characters that continue to exist, it becomes the only thing this sequel manages to stand on. then this sequel is way better than the American remake and clearly shows that the director still had something he wanted to tell and managed to find a means to say it in this story. Fans of the 1994 film would love to see the characters reunite again and solve some remaining parts of the mystery.
Engang tændt ovnen, far.
Marvelous verdict. Nightwatch was an essential entry in the Danish cinema to make people aware that there are a lot of interesting stories coming from Europe that need to be looked into. Over the years, there has been a rise in the number of people interested in global cinema, and Nightwatch is one of the reasons why people should explore cinema worldwide. After all, as we have mentioned, Nightwatch sounds like a film your friend recommended to you and you need more time to watch it. Check it out and let us know what you feel about the sequel. Do you think there is more to be explored in this, or could the 2023 film be accepted as the ending? And if you like our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.